Welcome to this EADI Decolonising Story initiative, and today I'm very happy to announce Beatrice Hati. I'm Hugo Pilkington, Professor of Geography at the University of Paris 8 with EADI. And Beatrice, you're an urbanist, and for nearly a decade you've dedicated yourself to transformative research and practice in marginalised areas and informal settlements across Africa and Asia. And you consider yourself as a pracademic, and you serve as the Urban Development and Research Specialist at Nuvoni, the Kenya hub of the International Center for Frugal Innovation. And you're also doing your PhD in Disaster Governance at the International Institute for Social Studies, which is obviously a part of the University of Erasmus Rotterdam. Your doctoral research blends an interdisciplinary expertise in disaster risk reduction, multi-level governance, informality, and participatory science to explore multiple value possibilities for fire disaster resilience in informal settlements. So let's get going. If you're okay with that, Bea?
Yes, super. I'm okay with that.
Great. Nice to have you. So when we
Thank you, Hugo.
engage in disaster research, it's not often that we talk about fires. We focus on fires. Could you tell us a little bit about your research and why fires exactly?
Yes, thank you, Hugo, and thank you for having me. A very accurate definition you have of me there. And indeed, it's not often that we talk about fires when we talk about disasters, and that is a pity, and I will tell you why. In my research, I decided to focus on fires because fires are one of the most common disasters that happen in rapidly urbanizing cities, yet fires do not get enough attention. I keep asking myself why we don't give much attention to fires, yet they happen on an everyday basis. But through my research, I've been able to identify why. And two critical reasons why I decided to focus on fire, apart from the fact that fires are ubiquitous or that they are more commonplace disasters, it's also because fires raise a fundamental scientific, intellectual, and practical problem. One of the critical hypotheses that I raise is that if cities are not being able to deal with everyday disasters such as these ones that we're talking about today, how do we expect cities to be able to deal with larger scale disasters such as climate change? So in a sense, fire provides us a very good canvas to observe how different actors organize themselves around the disaster, and also to understand how we can be able to understand more complex disasters. To highlight even more, my research focuses on informal settlements, which is what you have highlighted. And informal settlements are the most affected by all kinds of disasters, and particularly fires, where in a context like Nairobi, which is what I study, we have 3 to 4 fires reported every week from informal settlements. And this is just reported fires. So you can imagine how many fires go unreported, Hugo. So this is almost, I call it a slow-growing disaster.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
But fires are complex, and their occurrences in the non-formal governed context adds complexity to this. So how did you actually structure your methodology to meaningfully engage with this complexity?
Yeah. What I didn't mention earlier on is that my research is a critical qualitative inquiry research, which means that I question every terminology I use in my research, starting with the word terminology governance, going to informality, and going to look at who exactly should I focus on when I talk about governance in an informal setting. The reality is that in informal settlements, in most contexts, I talk about Nairobi now, but in informal settlements across the world, we find them being alienated from formal governance systems. But what we find is that the absence of formal governance systems does not equal lack of governance. We have informal systems, and especially those which are led by grassroots organizations that help communities to deal with disasters. So in my research, I turned this approach upside down, and I decided to focus on grassroots organizations who often have a neglected voice. We do not see them featuring very much in formal governance systems. So I focused on grassroots organizations and how they are able to build networks to be able to deal with fires. It is important that I highlight that the approach that I decided to pick is a southern community-based participatory research approach, or what I would shorten as Southern CBPR. And this approach was best fitting for my research for two reasons. One of the key powers of a Southern CBPR approach is its capacity to identify, elevate, and amplify neglected voices. And in this context, the neglected voices that we were identifying and elevating was the voices of grassroots organizations that act as fire champions in informal settlements. The second power of this approach is its capacity to integrate or to marry research agenda with an action agenda. In many times we find research does not often lead to action, and this is something I was very critical about. I think in the same sense of Ian Chalmers, who argues that research without action is wasteful research, I did not want to carry out wasteful research. So hence why I decided to pick a Southern CBPR approach.
That's very interesting. Yeah, certainly. How does this community-based participatory research look like on the ground? What specific tools do you use to actually be able to reach the neglected voices and to thus diversify knowledge?
Yeah. Thank you, Hugo. I think from the description, it almost sounds like a philosophy, right? When you say Southern CBPR, that's a philosophy. You argue that neglected voices need to be centered, but how do you do that? There are, of course, very many ways to do that, but I picked two particular tools to implement Southern CBPR approach. I used storytelling and participatory theater, and this was done with 6 grassroots organizations in Nairobi's informal settlement. And possibly you're wondering what is all this storytelling and participatory theater. So this was basically set up as storytelling circles, first with grassroots organizations alone, without fire administrators, without the residents, so just grassroots organizations. And they were able to exchange stories with each other of how they manage fires within their own settlements. Remember, these organizations are coming from a place of marginalization. They are not recognized as actors, and many times they are even stereotyped as criminals. So these storytelling circles were used as spaces for them to be open to each other, to say how they deal with fires, what arrangements they come up with. After doing the storytelling circles, we now went to the next step of bringing now different actors together. So we also had expert stories, and experts in this context I used to refer to fire administrators based on what is conventionally highlighted in the policy that these are experts. And so we undertook fire storing circles with also experts. Then in the third layer, we were able to bring this together in participatory theater sessions. Participatory theater can be carried out in many forms, but in my research, it was carried out in the form of fire drills, in the form of fire plays, so a selected play where people can take different roles of actors engaged in a fire setup. And it was also carried out in the form of fire games. So we also had a football tournament in the informal settlements of Nairobi of different actors playing football. So all this combined is what I call participatory theater. And I use a convolution of this method, so not individually, but together combined, so that they can be able to amplify the voices, but also to trigger action.
Well, that's so interesting. So can you just, this is very novel. So how does this methodology actually push the epistemic and praxis boundaries? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. Oh, this question makes me feel like I would start bragging, but I do not want to brag. So it would be really nice to have grassroots organizations, first of all, say what their experience of this research was.
This research enabled us first to connect with other grassroots organizations. We were also able to sit together with policymakers or with representatives from the county government who are directly in charge when it comes to responding to emergencies and disaster within Nairobi County. So to me also this research gave me hope. As I shared with you, I'd given up, on these issues. I felt like I was hitting, the wall alone without any support. I was the one who was feeling my bruises on my fist, and there was no one to help. But again, through this participating in this research, I was able to connect, with other people who gave me hope that I'm not the only one, I saw people from my community participating, holding the hosepipe, wanting to put off fire. I saw them, coming, wanting to put off the gas, as one of the causes of fire. So my experience again was that we brought the education to the people that needed it. And also, it was the first time that the people of Kibra saw the fire engine without coming to put off a fire. So that experience was like, what's the fire engine coming to do? Where is the fire? But this time round, there was no fire. It was an opportunity for us to touch it, to see it, to smell it, to know what its purpose is.
In addition to that, from my own perspective, looking back, I see this research pushing boundaries in three forms. First, in the form of knowledge, it was able to bring up subordinated knowledges. And in this case, these are knowledges that have not been seen as influential skills and capacity to be able to help in the governance of fires. So grassroots knowledge were elevated from being marginalized to being centered in fire governance. And I think I see this integration of subordinated knowledges and conventional knowledges as a way of pushing boundaries. Secondly, it's in the form of action. So this research was able to go beyond just understanding fire disasters and governance mechanisms around it. It was able to bring action. And one of the actions that I pride in this research is being able to see tensions being eradicated or tensions being covered in this context. We're able to see fire administrators, firefighters, being able to talk with communities, being able to conduct fire plays together, them playing football together, which is something that has never happened before. So this is a direction that leads to fostering cohesion between fire actors. So this is an action agenda that really is able to push boundaries in praxis. And I think another one that is very close to my heart is the capacity of these tools to be able to balance and flatten power hierarchies. In this research, despite me being a researcher, many times I was forced to sit back and be an observer. Sometimes I was forced to practice active listening and sometimes to even take social roles. For example, when we were doing fire plays, I was given a role. I would do stop, drop, and roll on the ground to demonstrate this in the play. So taking these different roles and not having a single position was powerful for me. And I think this research also embraced the notion of embrace all that you are. So grassroots organizations were seen not only as research participants, but as fire champions, as activists, as whatever they wanted to be. So I think this notion of shifting power and allowing people to take different positions in the research was able to push the boundaries in the research practice.
Well, that's certainly extremely interesting. Thank you so much, Bea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugo. And I hope to connect more about the research and the activities conducted.